The following is a special presentation of the PDF Sports Network.
You know, I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, it's not often we have a psychology major graduate on with us. I hope it doesn't get in our brains here, but I am excited for our guest today, Joe.
I'm very, very excited. He currently works as an MSG Network studio host. You can see him doing nightly stuff for the Knicks, nightly stuff for the Rangers. He is famous for the MSG fastest 150. Hopefully he gives us a little more than 150 seconds, but we're really, really, really excited to have him on. Can't wait to start this. Mr. Bill Pito. Bill, welcome to the show. First things first, Happy New Year. How are you doing today?
Great to see you guys. Thank you so much for coming on. And I didn't tell you ahead of time, I can only go for 150 seconds. So and then,
is Mercedes-Benz sponsoring this episode, Joe? That's what I want to know.
It's the Audi MSG one.
Audi. Bill, when you started that, do you ever think you would be spun off into a TV show?
I don't know. You know, it's a lot of it has to do. I have a great producer, Jeff Ostella, who comes up with all these clips, and he times it. He gets everything to time out perfectly. He finds the things that are a little offbeat. So it's been so much fun to work with him. But he comes up with most of the content that is the most entertaining. So I've been very lucky to be able to work with him at MSG for sure.
No doubt about it. Bill, you're from California. You've been on the East Coast now for a long time. Have you gotten used to the cold winters yet?
Well, I have a phobia about driving in snow. I often say when it's icy, it's dicey.
Yes.
But I'm originally from Manhattan. So all kidding aside, my first exposure to sports as a little boy in New York City was watching these great Knicks teams in the early 70s. So working at MSG covering the Knicks is really an amazing experience for me. Knicks have been my team my whole life, and to be a part of the coverage now has for the last decade or so has just been really a thrill.
Yeah, and you mentioned icy and dicey. One of our friends of our show, who was a guest, Adnan Verk, who is with MLB and NHL Network now, he said, you definitely got to ask Bill about that. And he said, you're an absolute legend. How does that make you feel when you hear stuff like that, or you hear stuff? Because if you watch ESPN Sports Center now, basically John Buccigross shouts you out every single Sports Center. So how does that make you feel knowing your lasting legacy there in Bristol?
Well, I hope you guys know I get a royalty anytime a catchphrase of mine is used. So I have a nice residual income coming to me. It makes me feel great. You know, the thing at ESPN, I was fortunate enough to be there for a long time, 15 years. And a lot of things that happen there behind the scenes are the most enjoyable in terms of forming the relationships with your coworkers. And I was very close to a lot of people. So it's very nice that they're saying these things about me.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you just kind of mentioned that you grew up in New York, you're a sports fan. Did you always know you wanted to pursue some sort of on-air job or sports job, or is it something you came to realize a little later on in life, maybe in college or post-graduation?
So I always knew I was, as I mentioned, born in New York, come from native New Yorkers. We moved to Palo Alto, California when I was 7. And then my dad was a Cornell graduate. So when it came time to go to school and I knew I wanted to pursue sportscasting, his advice was, hey, just go get the best degree you can, try to pick up some experience on the side or in school. And that was my strategy, because I'm a firm believer that to do this, you don't necessarily need a broadcasting degree. What you need is practical experience. I tell people who I talk to that when you come out of college, you really need a tangible representation of your work, a tape. And to have the best tape, you need the most experience you can at a young age. And what was really good about going to Cornell is that there aren't a lot of people that want to be on the air. If you go to Syracuse, I would imagine the competition to get experience on the college radio station is probably very competitive. At Cornell, there are people that are interested in doing this, but it was not something that a lot of kids wanted to do. So there was a tremendous amount of opportunity for me in college to work on the campus radio station. I got involved with the Cornell football and basketball broadcasts. I was very fortunate that while I was at Cornell, the city of Ithaca started a news channel, a newscast, of which I became a sportscaster. I actually worked with Carl Ravitch on that channel, believe it or not. And then when I got my first job in Binghamton, Carl Ravitch and I worked together. We were the sports department at WBNG in the late 1980s, and Trey Wingo was on another station in Binghamton. So
Wow.
a little lineage there for you. But the thing is that for me, graduating from Cornell, I had an excellent tape from this Ithaca news channel doing the sports on that I was able to send out. So that's what really helped me, was getting this experience while I was in college.
A lot of really great, strong ESPN connections even there. That's outstanding. So Nick alluded to this at the top. You majored in psychology, which is really, really interesting. Now, you gave us an interesting piece of advice, maybe something that we haven't heard from before, when you said to do this, maybe you need more practical experience and more real life experience than necessarily devoting all your time studying this. So you have a psychology degree, which is interesting. How do you apply that to your daily life? How do you apply that to what you do here? Naturally, when you work in this industry, you encounter a lot of different people who will do a lot of different things. So is there any type of strategy on your end that goes into that with your degree?
Well, I really like people. I guess I like, I'm really into studying coaches. But in terms of what I've done and the preparation for what I've done, my degree, I don't think has a lot to do with it. Because if you want to be an actor, or you want to be a sportscaster, you want to be a newscaster, the degree is secondary to what you look like and sound like on tape. The people that are doing the hiring do not care about your degree. They care about the resume tape. So yeah, you need a college degree, but if you are a broadcasting major and you don't have the broadcasting skills, or you're a broadcasting major and your tape is not good, you're not going to get the job. Not once has anybody ever asked me what my degree was in. All that has mattered was what they thought of my work, what they thought of my tape, what they thought of my resume tape. So, if you guys are in the process of giving advice to young people or soliciting advice about a track, it's not what is done in the classroom for this business. Now, this is not being a lawyer or a doctor. Obviously, that is a completely different track where you need to have the academics, learn in class, you need the law degree, et cetera. This is a practical endeavor. You either can do it and someone's going to hire you to do it, or you can't. And it all matters in terms of your performance, not the academic part of it. That can help. You need to be able to write, et cetera. But the most important thing is you got to be able to perform. And more importantly than that, you got to have someone that's going to give you an opportunity. And that's the biggest challenge of all.
Yeah, I think networking is huge, and it's definitely important to get some internships as well as you can. But you mentioned your tape. Obviously, you must have had a pretty good tape here where you're able to come out of college and get a job as a sports director working in Binghamton for WBNG. What was that process like for you, coming out of college and starting to send your tape out and getting the first job?
So I got the first job in Binghamton, and then it becomes, okay, I'm making $6 an hour. I have my Cornell degree, and right away your parents are like, well, where is this going, right? I mean, $6 an hour is not, it probably still pays $6 an hour. As much as I enjoyed being there and I worked with Carl and you have young people, there's also a certain pressure on getting the next step. And back then you had to go to there was no internet then. You literally had to go to the post office and mail your tapes out and hope that someone would look at it. And I was at the post office so often that they would say, the post people there would say, Bill, where's it going today? Where are we mailing these today? Back then I would subscribe to Broadcasting Magazine. There was this recording, I'll never forget, a daily recording of jobs on Media Line that you'd pay for. And it became this full-time job to get another job. And we used to joke that, you think you have a good sportscast in Binghamton, but the air check tape has a wrinkle in it. If the air check tape has a wrinkle in it, you can't dub it off to your resume. Or maybe you think you have a great show, but one of the tapes didn't roll on time, or there was a screw up on the scoreboard. When you work, guys, in small market TV, getting on the air, the preparation of the sportscast is almost more difficult than the actual presentation of the sportscast, because you're out there shooting high school football. You got to get a score in from the coach. That's not easy to do. Back when I was in Binghamton, the Whalers were there, the Binghamton Whalers. It was the Hartford Whalers / Washington Capitol farm team. So you'd go to the arena and shoot your hockey video and have to run around and get your high school basketball video. And Ravage used to always kid me because my stuff always came back pink because I didn't white balance the camera properly. The point is, and then you come back and you got your feeds of the Yankee game and the Met game. I mean, the point is a scramble to get on the air was often such an incredible challenge that just sitting down and doing it was almost the easy part of it.
Yeah, I can imagine the behind the scenes work that go into it. So then you move up to a bigger market, you go to Syracuse, and you're not there too long, and then you join Sports News Network. So you decide to go technically from a everyday sportscast local to, I guess at that time it would be more of like a national type of network. Is that correct?
Right. So what's interesting here is that, you look back on your career, and I can tell you my career and a lot of peers of mine had been the direct result of the explosion of cable TV sports. So I start out in Binghamton. I want to be like a main guy in Chicago. Back in 1987, when I started my career, I want to be a major market sportscaster. Then all of a sudden, things start to change. So in 1990, the Mislu Sports News Network was ESPN News 6 years before ESPN News. It was 24-hour sports news, and they hired a bunch of us young, cheap people to get the experience to put the network on the air. At the time, think in 1990, 24-hour sports news was unthinkable. Like the thought was, what in the world are you guys doing? Back then, ESPN didn't even run SportsCenter on in the morning. They had like a business show on. But this is the beginning of the evolution of sports news. And the unfortunate part about that network, the Mislu Sports News Network, it was just a little bit ahead of its time. It wasn't capitalized enough. If it had come down 5 years later, I bet you it would still be on the air. It was just 24-hour sports news, maybe 4 or 5 years too early. But it was a great experience. I don't know if you guys are familiar with some of these old names, but like Terry Chick was on the network. He had a great run at CNN. Carrie Ross, who was really well known for her work at ESPN before she came to our network. So that was a real incredible experience for someone like me at the age of 24 to be able to have that experience. It was like an ESPN format, with someone who was 24 years old. So it was great experience.
Yeah, 24 doing sports on a big level like that must have been pretty awesome. And but before its time is definitely right. I know we had Doug Kazarian on here, Liam McHugh, and they back in the day used to do these sports betting shows, which ended up getting canceled. And I said, you guys are just ahead of your time. It just, now you see everything sports betting nonstop, DraftKings, all that. So I guess a lot of it just depends on the timing and, being in the right place and right time sometimes. But you end up breaking in with ESPN as a field producer, working on Scholastic Sports America. What was that like? And during that period, you're also doing work for New England Cable News, and then you're there when ESPN2 launches in 1993. So how did you maybe work your way from producer to on air there? Was there a lot of talks behind the scenes with the senior producers or execs, and what was that process like?
Okay, so I'm 24. I think I'm big time, right? I'm on the Mislu Sports News Network. Guess what? Mislu Sports News Network goes out of business, and Bill Pito can't get a job anywhere. Seriously. No one in the world at that point even cared about Mislu Sports News Network. So we were in New Jersey, and I'm on the unemployment line in New Jersey. So I'm 2 years out with my big Ivy League degree, and I can't get a job. I'm on unemployment. So this is how things work, and it's a great story here because Dennis Denninger, who is now on the faculty at Syracuse University, saw me on the air when I was on the air in Syracuse. And when Mislu Sports News Network folded, and I had been out of work 6 months, I got in touch with him because I knew we had been in touch because he liked what he saw when I was on the air in Syracuse, and he hired me as a freelancer to be on Scholastic Sports America as a field producer. And guys, I was the worst field producer in the history of this industry. I was terrible at it. I was traveling around with Dan Debenham. Very interesting. Every week you go to a great national high school athlete and do the story or whatever, but I'm just not that creative with the editing and the writing, and that's what I had to do. So I was not good at that. Around that time, ESPN Radio was launching, and they gave me an audition to be an update guy on ESPN radio. And guys, I choked it. I absolutely choked it. You know, I don't know if you have these nightmares about when you're supposed to be on the air and you're not in your spot, but these updates on the audition were like every 15 minutes. And I wasn't like, I couldn't turn the stuff around quick enough. So I literally, I'm telling you, I bombed the radio audition. So I'm thinking I'm done, right? I'm done. I'm not a great field producer. I had my shot for ESPN radio. It didn't go well. Around that time, a former executive at Sports News Network went to New England Cable News in Boston and hired me to be a sportscaster there. It's a 24-hour regional news network, New England Cable News, and I was one of the sports people there. So for all of the people that look for jobs, think about this now. Someone who saw me has hired me at ESPN, and while that didn't work out, an old contact of mine from Sports News Network has hired me in Boston. So, you know, you talk about the job search, so often it comes down to getting in, and then the people that you know move on and bring you along. So again, the explosion of cable has helped me here because they've started a news channel in Boston, and I'm one of the sportscasters. I work with a guy named Mike Adams. We had a lot of fun. We did this goofy show at 11 o'clock at night. It's like 1993. I had an agent who happened to be Keith Olbermann's agent. Her name was Jean Sage. So that means that Jean Sage, when Jean Sage calls ESPN, she's got an inroad to potentially get you a look. So she keeps calling ESPN. So you got to look at this kid, Bill Pito. And the response is, he can't even do radio. How are we going to give him a shot on TV? So that was a really tough thing to overcome. But when ESPN2 launched, they brought in a bunch of us for auditions in February. I actually, in February of 93, Gene Sage somehow got me in the door for an audition, Sports Center audition at the time. I was so nervous. You can only imagine, you know, I'm 28 years old. I'm telling you that it's one of those things that you open your mouth and you hope the words come out, right? And I happened to audition against Carl Ravitch for a Sports Center spot. Dan Shulman was also in the audition mix there. The offer first went to Dan Shulman, who turned it down. Look what happened in his career now as a play-by-play guy.
Absolutely.
Ravitch, who I had worked with in Binghamton and was really good friends with and always had kind of been a little bit ahead of him, he got the offer. February 93. I didn't get the offer. So how about that story, right? So Ravitch gets hired. ESPN2 launches in August of that summer, and they called back to offer me a spot on the Sports Smash, which was an update segment on the initial show on ESPN2. But to get in there after all that, I thought was a miracle.
Yeah, that's an incredible journey there. And, you know, I know firsthand about the tough times where you can't get the job and you're just reaching out to people, and, you know, it worked out for you. So obviously you wouldn't change anything there, but I'm sure there was a time there when you were on the unemployment line where your parents were pestering you to pursue that psychology career path. Is that correct?
Well, I'll tell you guys a secret. I actually took a course to take the MBA test, the GMAT or whatever it was. I bombed that test. I have gotten a worse score on that test than any Cornell graduate in the history of the GMAT. Thank heavens. Thank heavens.
Worked out for you.
This has worked out.
No doubt about it. So you're at ESPN. You're there from 93 to 2008. You're doing Sports Smash. I want to know, how did you work your way up the scale there? NHL Tonight was there at the time. That was a huge show. NFL Primetime, you did some of that. You did Baseball Tonight, a lot of ESPN News, and eventually Sports Center. So how did that all progress for you throughout your time there?
So we all came in. It was me, Stuart Scott, and Deb Placey. Deb Kaufman at the time were the Sports Smash anchors originally. The original host on the Sports Night show was supposed to be a hip hop show, like, you know, cool sports, you know, Keith Olbermann wearing a leather jacket. I don't know if you guys ever saw it. It's called Sports Night. Keith, Mitch Albom, and Susie Colbert were the anchors. And then the show didn't do very well. So they changed ESPN2 into a sports specific network. So we had a hockey show, which I did. They had an NBA Tonight show, which I think Stewart did. Reese Davis did a little bit of that. An RPM Tonight show, which was a NASCAR show. So the whole philosophy of the network changed, and I ended up doing hockey. Knew nothing about hockey at the time. It's February 95. The Rangers had just won the cup and they locked out. Unfortunately, I think for the sport, that was a huge opportunity not to have that happen then. So they delayed the start of NHL Tonight till February of 95. And I was the original host of NHL Tonight. Out of nowhere, and at ESPN, one thing you realize is that a lot of the opportunities that are presented to you, they come out of nowhere. You can go in and pitch and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, but a lot of times these decisions are made in these meetings. And in August of 95, I get called to an office and they say, we want you to do primetime with Chris Berman.
Wow.
That's incredible.
What? I mean, I've been there 2 years. Now that you talk about a thrill, you're kind of the sidekick where you get one game in the first half hour and two late games in the second half hour. And that second half hour leading into the Sunday night game in that era, that's 5-6 million people watching that show. So I was on there.
What was it like meeting Chris Berman and he has to know that he's going to be working with you?
I tell you guys, it's still the biggest thrill. I unfortunately, looking back, I don't think I was necessarily ready for that stage. That's a huge, back in that era. There's no internet. There's not a lot of other cable sports stations. That show was where everybody saw the highlights.
Yeah.
7 to 8 on Sunday night was where everybody saw there wasn't Red Zone back then. So that was a huge opportunity. Chris Berman's a most unassuming, gracious. He's an incredible performer. He's like my idol. I think he's like, obviously I go back a little bit further than a lot of the young guys who are at it right now. But for people of my era, he is the yardstick because of I love his he's just an entertainer.
Right.
And he made it fun. And his quips he's just brilliant and quick and energetic. And it was, unfortunately for me, I was a little bit nervous during that time because I you have to be comfortable in the moment to do this as best as you can. To be honest, guys, I was a little bit awe of the stage, but it was still a couple of years on that was an incredible opportunity. I
mean, yes, you're absolutely right. I think one of the best things that ESPN did, especially in the time that you were there, were essentially creating performers. And I think everybody has their own little category that they can put themselves in.
Well, it's catchphrase city, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we've seen this with all Stuart Scott, the great late Stuart Scott, Chris Berman, obviously fits this mold, not only with his time in NFL primetime, but doing the home run derby, back. Dan Patrick, Rich Eisen, Keith Olbermann. I think the list goes on and on and on. And obviously Bill Pito is included in that. Maybe you're not as animated as the rest of those, but I think you've done a really, really successful and terrific job yourself in your own right.
Well, I appreciate it. So then, after NHL Tonight, I got into the Sports Center rotation. Did a lot of, like in 98, 99, did a lot of shows, worked with Keith and Dan a little fair amount, and did a little Baseball Tonight. And then unfortunately, it's a big place, a lot of people there. Then I kind of started doing ESPN News, which was, I used to joke that I used to spend my Sundays with Chris Berman. Now I'm on the Monistat halftime report. So I used to do the Sunday halftime report of the Big Ten, Big Ten women's game, which was fine. But the point is that you have so many people there. You have a lot of competition, and sometimes you're kind of up on the scale and sometimes you're not. So.
Yeah, certainly it seems like it can bring out the best in people, but it's also super competitive. And if you're not ready for it, it could eat you up. But you had great success there. You made a lot of good friends. And as I mentioned earlier, they still reference you on the air. So hopefully those royalty checks are coming, even if they're 1 penny each time. You get your catchphrases there. But when you're there, and Joe mentioned everybody had a catchphrase, did that come to you and you're like, I better start thinking of some catchphrases here so people remember me, or did it just happen to come out sometimes and then you stuck with it?
It's a good question. The goal light and the developing situation just came out of that wasn't planned. The other one that I say a lot, I used to say to Tom Jackson, what do you have? To get his comment instead of, Tommy, or I used to say, what do you have? I don't know. I think the best ones are the ones that just kind of, there was definitely, you're conscious of what everybody else is doing, but if you try to force it, sometimes it's not as natural. Some people really had successful careers there and didn't have a lot of shtick, but it was fun at the time to see, what else guys would come up with. I mean, Kenny Mayne, geez, he's just, and Stewart, he had just a bookload full of stuff,
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Kenny's great. I still love that he uses the same catchphrases. He does the same thing. And obviously, you gotta love when there's a hockey highlight, like 2 minutes left in the show, and Buccigross goes, "All right, now to our leading story here," right at the end of the show. So big hockey guy there. And it's crazy to hear that you didn't know anything about hockey, weren't a big hockey fan. So how did this opportunity with MSG come about for you? And obviously, was moving back home a major factor for you in taking that position?
Okay, so what happened is that again, it's a situation where the guy that was running MSG at the time, Dan Ronayne, was a huge hockey guy. He's a huge Red Wings fan. He's from Detroit, so he was familiar with my work at ESPN on NHL Tonight all those years back. We're talking 2009 now, when NHL Tonight obviously was in the middle 90s. So when it came time for them to fill this position, the fact that I had that hockey experience, I think kind of got him thinking about it. So I was very lucky with that. These jobs they're just not a lot of jobs. The thing about TV is that everybody's going to the same place. Think about it. Everybody needs to work in basically the same handful of networks to make enough money in sports to support a family. That's why this is so competitive, right? Everybody's going to the same place. So I'm at ESPN. Thankfully, MSG offered me a job because at the time I was at Mad Dog Radio. I was not at ESPN anymore. And doing Sirius on Mad Dog Radio was a great experience, but I'm more of a TV person. And thankfully, Dan Ronayne gave me an opportunity, and I've been at MSG ever since. And, it's been great. MSG, I'm working with Mike Breen, who's a Hall of Famer, the NBA. Sam Rosen, who's a hockey announcing Hall of Famer, as people know. We got Joe Micheletti. We got Kenny Albert. I'm around greatness. And that has been one of the great thrills as a native New Yorker, not only to be around these teams, but the peer group that I work with. They're all-time greats.
Nick and I would totally agree with that statement. Kenny was exceptional with us. We had a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun so far here. But what I wanted to ask you in particular is, you just chimed in and you mentioned your time with Mad Dog Radio. We were going to get to that. But what would you say is the biggest difference between doing TV and radio? And why would you say, for yourself, it seems like you've always been much more comfortable doing television as opposed to radio, which is interesting because I think the prevailing opinion from mostly everybody else would be, I think doing radio might be a little bit easier than doing TV. So obviously you differ here. So what would you say the biggest difference is, and why do you think you're more comfortable being on camera, on air, doing TV as opposed to radio?
So the hardest thing I've ever done in my whole life is hosting a 4-hour radio show all by myself. I mean, the people that can do that.
Yeah. I don't know how you could talk that long by yourself. Yeah, especially if there's no callers.
They're so talented. It's one thing if you have a co-host or a lot of these guys bring in like the engineer or the producer to help them through. But so as a TV host, you need to say as much as you can succinctly, right? Radio doesn't work. Succinctness doesn't work on radio because you have to fill all that time. If you're too succinct on radio, you're going to run out of things to say very quickly. Also, as a host, which has been what I've done my whole career, you're not necessarily that opinionated. So on the radio, you got to have opinions and you have to be long-winded. You take those two skills to being a TV host and it doesn't work. If you're too opinionated as a TV host or you're too wordy, you're not going to work out. So I found it, a lot of people can go from TV to radio. I'm sorry, from radio to TV, because I think it's a lot easier to make things tighter and more condensed as opposed to being on TV and then having to stretch things out for radio. I found it very difficult. I think if you think about the industry, there are very few people that do both.
Yeah, that's very true. Basically, just the ESPN people, the top guys right now, are doing radio shows as well, which are just extensions of their TV shows. But I want to ask you about the B Team and Mad Dog Radio. What was your experience like meeting Mad Dog for the first time?
He's amazing. He is just genuine and upbeat and fun, and I love his approach. He doesn't take himself too seriously. He butchers a language every other day. He's got an encyclopedic photographic memory of things. He's great. I think he's fantastic. I was a huge fan of him and Mike and the Mad Dog. It's too bad that obviously that era has passed, but he's fantastic. And I say he does that all by himself now. And he's great at it. He's fun. He's a good guy too. He's a lot of fun to be around.
Yeah, absolutely love his baseball show, High Heat, as well. And I know Joe works in Secaucus, so I used to be there. So anytime you see him, it's like, oh my gosh, look at this guy. His energy is just off the charts.
He's a nice guy, right, fellas? He's a nice guy.
He's an exceptional guy, and his energy is off the charts. What I will say is I've been in the building and I had the opportunity. I didn't really formally have a discussion with him. I got to see him once and kind of acknowledge him and say hi one time when he was in the building. But he's one of those people where if he's near you and he's in your presence,
right?
You feel it. You feel
right.
it.
See, he is who he is.
With everybody else.
Right. The thing is that, as you guys are working, trying to help people along, the whole thing is not to change when the light goes on, right?
Right.
That's Mad Dog.
Right.
The Mad Dog you hear on the radio is a Mad Dog that you interact with in real life. And that's why he's great.
No doubt about it. So you're at MSG, you're coming in, and I think, someone who's a little underappreciated as a whole, as far as a broadcaster goes, is Al Trotwood. Very talented, able to do multiple sports, did gymnastics, of course, for the Olympics. And basically, he was with MSG since the network launched. What did you learn from him when you came in? Since basically, I'm guessing you probably had to shadow him a little bit, since you'd be learning how to do the anchor duties when he's doing the Knicks, and then you would fill in for the Rangers or vice versa.
So I've been around greatness wherever I've been. I've been very lucky, right? Al Trotwood, to me, there's no one who can set a scene about why tonight is important with that great voice of his ability with the language to say, okay, tonight's important. That to me was his brilliance. And he's a great host. Olympics, as you mentioned, he's been around MSG for years. And that's the one thing about Al. Like, you're around a lot of these guys and they each have really special skills. And to me, Al's greatest skill is that when we come on the air, he can tell you in 20 seconds why tonight is a big night.
No doubt about it. Also, I was an intern there, so I met a lot of great people there. Someone who you worked with in the early days there was Tina Cervasio. I think she did an incredible job, and she did some Red Bull stuff as well. So obviously MSG expanding upon their broadcast network there to do that. But overall, you mentioned the other people there on the air, and just an incredible staff there. And you've worked with so many people from ESPN, you've worked with amazing people at MSG, and we kind of mentioned it with Chris Berman, but who are some people that when you're meeting for the first time, you maybe got a little starstruck or were intimidated about the fact that you're going to be working with this person on the air?
Well, Keith Olbermann, to me, is the greatest writer in the history of cable sports news. When you watched him over the years, you have to understand that what he said was his words. No one has ever or will ever write like he writes. He's number one. And when I did a show with him, it was back in that day, each anchor would do like 3 or 4 highlights in a row. It wasn't back and forth. And he had the first 3 or 4 highlights. And in those 3 or 4 highlights, he took every catchphrase that I have ever said. Comes to me, and I'm like, I got nothing in the bag. You know what I mean? So Oberman's incredible writer, incredible with the language. Stuart Scott was like Berman. They light up the studio. The studio is like an empty stage, and it comes to life when you sit down there. And Stuart Scott was a brilliant performer, a brilliant entertainer, up there with Chris Berman in terms of that skill. Dan Patrick, kind of like a lot of these wry comedians, laid back. That's why he and Keith were such a good pair, because he's kind of like sneaky funny, understated funny, wise guy funny. I don't know if you guys remember Craig Kilborn, but Craig Kilborn back in the early 90s may have been our biggest star yet. He was on that 2 a.m. Sports Center, and he just would, everything he said was popular, it seemed. And again,
it's wild to think he went from Sports Center to late night television.
He was the first host. He left ESPN. He was Jon Stewart before Jon Stewart on the Daily Show.
Yes, absolutely, totally true.
So, a lot of talented guys. And now I work with Mike Breen, and Mike Breen is the most unassuming superstar I've ever met in my life, in terms of he is just the most down-to-earth, humble superstar I've ever been around. He is such a nice guy. And like he'll say, it's a pleasure to work with you, Bill. Pleasure to work with me. It's a pleasure to work with you. You're in the Hall of Fame, going into the Hall of Fame.
I got the opportunity to meet Mike Breen when he visited Marist College. So I went to Marist, Nick went to St. John's. So we both went to school for this, but I had the opportunity to meet Mike Breen when he came up there, and he was nothing but truly outstanding. I would love the opportunity for him to come on, and maybe he could do this with us one day. So you briefly mentioned Dan Patrick. Quick follow-up here. Did he ever prank you, or did he ever go after you in any way? Because I know he's kind of a jokester. He's kind of, laying traps on the side. We had Liam McHugh on, and Liam was talking about the time that Dan ended up getting him. So were you ever one of his victims at any point, or did he ever target you in any way?
I was not. Maybe I should consider myself grateful.
So now you're doing Knicks broadcasts have returned, thankfully. The season has started. You get to work with the amazingly talented people, Alan Hahn, Wally Zerbiak. Wally is tremendous. I worked freelance for CBS Sports a couple of years ago, and there were times that we were doing college basketball, and we did the NCAA tournament, and we had him in the studio, and I met him a couple of times, had conversations with him. He's nothing but outstanding too. So in the future, assuming you're still with MSG, maybe one day soon you move on to bigger and better things. What are some athletes, or who are some athletes that you would want to work with in the future, and which athletes do you think would make a great transition doing television work, so on and so forth?
Well, I tell you, it's interesting because, there's a report in the Post that the Rangers may be interested in Brian Boyle. I think Brian Boyle, when he decides to retire, is going to be great on television.
Oh, yeah.
You're not the first person who has told us Brian Boyle.
Other people have said that, or I'm the first?
Kenny Albert. Kenny
Albert mentioned Brian Boyle too?
Yeah.
I
think we'll be seeing Brian Boyle doing games somewhere, especially if you hear the rumors now that ESPN might be looking to pick up an NHL package. They'll be looking for some analysts.
Who else is really good? I'm trying to think in the NBA.
How about Sean Avery for hockey?
It's not too controversial. You know who's going to be great? Austin Rivers. I don't know if you guys have heard him in a little bit. He's been on the Knicks, but he's really well spoken and engaging. We've had Dan Girardi on a little bit at times. He could be good. I guess he's coaching. Ryan Callahan might be pretty good.
Landry Fields and Jeremy Lin, I think would be some good basketball guys. Landry was a funny guy.
You know, it's pretty good as Steve Novak's on. He's pretty good.
Yeah, he's awesome, Steve. One of the best. Discount double check.
There
His
you go.
were amazing then. What a
There
great
you
run
go.
that was. And those are the glory days. But Nick's turning around now. But how has it been like, going into MSG and there's nobody there, and seeing that Mike or Kenny and Walt are doing the road games from the studio. You guys got to get up, leave the set or whatever. And what are you expecting here with the hockey season with no fans in there as well? And is that going to be tough to see the players get the juice there? Because I think in hockey, more so than any other sport, it's really a game of momentum and playing off the fan base.
So, what's really interesting is from a viewer perspective, when these guys are calling road games from our studio, I don't think you can tell the difference. I really don't. And Clyde Frazier is so happy because he can do the road games and be home by 10 o'clock.
Right.
Like they just were on the road for 8 days, and Clyde says, I'm in heaven. I haven't had to leave home. I don't know how this is going to go going forward, but in terms of the broadcast, I don't think it's suffered very much. I think the Knicks have been electric so far. There is nothing like covering this team when they're playing like they are. We have remarked that, geez, if the fans had been in the Garden last night, oh my heavens, with the win against Utah and the way they've been playing, it would be electric. It's going to be interesting with hockey because MSGs, you guys know, Rangers, Devils, and Islanders. I'm not sure how the space is going to work out. There's not an issue when the teams are at home because we can the crews can work out of the home arenas. But when the teams are on the road, for example, if we have the Knicks on the road, the Rangers on the road, and either the Devils or the Islanders on the road, I don't know how that's going to work. So that's going to be interesting. Hopefully,
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was the hardest transition or part of your day or part of your daily routine that was upended during this pandemic? Because there was definitely a period of time, there was a couple months where everybody was kind of laying low, and fortunately we had the NBA and we had the NHL and we had Major League Baseball kind of all come back around the same time. Mid to late July, everything was kind of getting going again, and now you're really seeing everything kind of starting to get going again in terms of restarting these seasons when they are doing it now. But what was the hardest part of your routine during the pandemic? What do you think is going to be the most difficult part of doing broadcasts moving forward?
just the uncertainty has been the biggest issue. We were very lucky at MSG because remember last year, March 11th, we're through most of the NBA and we're through most of the NHL in terms of the regular season. And then the Rangers came back and played those games against Carolina. So basically most of our work at MSG occurs from October to April or May, depending on if a team makes a playoff. So yeah, we came up a little bit short last year, but getting through to March, not much of a difference. Then obviously in the off season during the summer, we did MSG 150 at home, that show, that talk show that we do on Zoom. So that kept us busy a little bit with the Zoom. That's a whole new thing, is having people at home on Zoom, and then they're able to put it on the air with nobody at work. It's amazing how this technology is just exploding here, allowing these networks to stay on the air. But during this process, it's just the uncertainty, guys. Like, you don't know when the games were going to start. Up until a couple of weeks ago, we didn't know what the story was with the NHL. But in terms of my calendar, nothing really changed because normally I'm off pretty much free during the summer. Now, one of the things now that's changed, and I'm very grateful for this, MSG is very, very serious about us getting tested on a regular basis. So we actually go in earlier than normal a couple times a week to make sure that we're COVID free. So we go in and they have an elaborate testing center set up, and that's been a little bit altering our routine, but very much appreciated for all of us, for sure.
I take you back to 2014. Rangers make the run to the Cup. What was it like covering the team then? You're doing all these extra shows. Obviously outside they were doing the blue carpets and fans are going crazy. And can you think of what it would be like if we get another summer of '94 here, where you got the Knicks and the Rangers making deep runs, and Imagine a parade down the Canyon of Heroes. I want to know who from MSG is going to be in the studio and who's going to be in the parade or at City Hall covering it for us.
Well, I think the Breen or Rosen probably would be at the parade, you know, because they're the voices of those franchises, and they've been doing it for years, and they're both in the Hall of Fame. But boy, I tell you, if we could get these teams rolling like that, that would be phenomenal. I don't know how closely you watch the Knicks. I am really optimistic and really surprised by what has happened here so far at 5-3.
It's all on the coach.
You know what's amazing, guys? You look at the starting five last year. The starting five last year may have been better. They had Marcus Morris.
So you tweeted that out, yeah.
Taj wasn't. Taj is. This looks like he's coming back, but he started and not Mitch. But you had Marcus Morris and not Bullock starting. You could say that the lineup was better last year. And look at what the difference the coaches made. It's amazing to me.
The defensive structure is outstanding, and I made this point. I think I tweeted Brandon Tierney, who we also had on. He was amazing too. Very optimistic, but when you watch the Knicks in these games, and I think this would be a terrific point to at least bring up on the broadcast. When we're watching the games, last night they were in the fourth quarter. They were down less. It was under 2 minutes in the fourth quarter. I think they had built up a 6 or 7 point lead, whatever it was, before Rivers hit the dagger shots at the end of the game. And one of the things that I have noticed, and I noticed this in the Atlanta game too, this team is not in the penalty very often. They go stretches of 4, 5, 6 minutes in quarters where they don't commit fouls.
That's a really good
They
point.
committed a foul, and I think it was like their third team foul with less than 2 minutes remaining in the game. And I think that is such a testament to what they've been able to do so far in terms of defensive structuring, in terms of getting the team to buy into it. It makes everything so much more easier, knowing that you don't have to rely on that. You have these guys are not getting into foul trouble. I know the first couple of games, Mitch Robinson was having difficulty with foul trouble. The last 2 or 3 games, he has not. Still early in the season, but what I think he's doing is absolutely tremendous in terms of the structure, and there's actual an identity now. It's really, really refreshing to see, I think.
So Mitch last night plays a career high 41 minutes.
Absolutely, there you go.
Fouls and hangs in there against Rudy Gobert. So that's
all NBA.
You know, if he stays out of foul trouble, he's key. I mean, he's not maybe scoring a ton, although he did have 16 a couple of games ago, but his defensive presence has been huge.
I'm excited to see Frank Ntilikina get back because I think he is a perfect player for Thibodeau. His defense first mentality, I think, ultimately leads to some major playing minutes. Maybe
I don't. Where do you see him though? Seriously, because you got Quickly and Peyton at the point with Rivers and Bullock and Burks when he comes back. I don't know if Frank's going to play a lot, to be honest with you. Where's he going to play?
I don't know. I think Thibodeau is going to like his defense at some point, and we'll see. I mean, you got to. I mean, you guys mentioned it in the post game, but if Toppin comes back, someone's going to the bench. You're not going to have a 12-man rotation anyway, so we'll see what happens.
Frank is always hurt, though, man. You know, I hope he comes back soon.
Could have seen him play in the triangle. It would have been perfect. But I wanted to ask you, what has been your favorite sporting event or game to cover?
You know, back in being part of that cup run in 2014, the electricity, I was over across the street doing the blue carpet stuff, you know, kind of like the pregame to the pregame. It was a madhouse. And that was a huge, huge thrill. There have been a couple of times here in the last year where we've really had some big time things happen. Kobe's death, we were on the air. He died at like that terrible helicopter crash. You know, we got word of that at like 2:00, and at 6:30, whatever, we're on with a pregame show. And that was a real challenge for all of us to get through that. The death of David Stern was something else that was a major deal. And last year, March 11th, the Knicks are at Atlanta and they canceled the season and we're on the air. That's what the beauty of this job is that when you go to work, you don't know what may happen that day. That's what makes this so much fun, because you don't know what's going to happen. You got to be ready for whatever may happen, and you have to be able to adjust. And that's why it has been so much fun. And MSG is very loosely structured in terms of the formats of our shows. There's a lot of freewheeling nature to what we do, and it's just been such a joy, because you know, you're around teams and guys that you love, and things that happen you have to respond to, and that's what's made it so much fun.
Bill, don't want to get you in trouble here, but what do you think about Ron Duguay's fashion sense?
Well, Ron Duguay's fashion sense is Ron Duguay's fashion sense.
Yeah, he was on some show like a few years ago. He got like a makeover. I forget what it was. I don't know if it was like a Wendy Williams or something, but I thought that was absolutely hysterical. Last thing I want to leave you with here is that Anish Shroff, who works at ESPN, he said in your last shift at ESPN, you got a standing ovation in the newsroom. Is that true? And how did that feel, getting such respect from your peers?
Well, I got to tell you, it was very emotional leaving there. And, it was really, really nice. I get a little emotional even thinking about it, but that was a really special moment, and I was there. I made some really good friends, and yeah, that's something I'm not going to ever forget. That's for sure. I used to, did Anish tell you he used to screw up his name all the time on the air?
No.
I used to call him Anisha. I once went on ESPN News and said, "Welcome to ESPN News. I'm Ben Becker." Because Ben Becker called out sick, and his script was in the teleprompter, and I read it verbatim.
Oh my God.
So you guys, Anish Shroff was on. He's a good guy too.
Future guests on our show. We've been in contact, and we're gonna get him on.
Oh, good. You guys are hitting all the bases, huh?
We're trying. Nick is very, very good when it comes to that, and I'm very, very fortunate. And I'm very, very fortunate that you were able to come on and do this with us. Before you mentioned that everywhere you've gone to, you've been surrounded by greatness. And what I would say to you is, I think you should give yourself a little more credit. I think if you were to ask all these great people who you've had the pleasure of working with and who have come into your life, I would be willing to bet that all that talent would attribute their success to you as well, and working beside you and developing friendships with you and developing partnerships with you. We loved having you on. This was so much fun. Hopefully when Nick and I move to MSG Digital one day,
Do it.
you can come on and we can have some weekly feature or stuff like that.
I'd love to.
I
I can't thank you guys enough. Thank you for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. What we do here is we always give our guests the last word. So if there's anything else you would like to share, if there's anything you would like to promote to our listeners, go right ahead. The floor is yours. You have 150 seconds. Go.
Start the clock. Well, for those that are trying to pursue this, I would just say, you got to work at your craft. To those that are starting out, I always tell someone, don't go to a big network in a production position. Go to a smaller town and get on the air as soon as you can. Because again, it is what you look like and what you sound like on tape. That is the most important thing. If you go to a big network off the air in production, they're always going to look at you as a production person. If you are in a smaller market, you have a much better chance to get hired at a bigger network on the air because you're on the air. It is almost unheard of to work your way up in a big network from an off-air position to an on-air position unless you go away and come back. So that's something I don't know the young people understand. If you want to be on the air, the most important thing is to get on the air. So that's what I would say. You got to be persistent. When you look at my track, once you get in, a lot of people who are hiring you move on, and hopefully you have a relationship and they bring you with them or whatever the case may be. So the key is to get in and hone your craft and be persistent. I've been at this a long time. We've all taken a lot of hits, and you got to be resilient and persistent. But that's what I would tell all those who aspire to try to do this. It's a great way to make a living if you're fortunate enough to get it rolling. That's for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And if you're able to get a job as a sports personality on TV, it's almost as if you're not working at all. So thanks, Bill. We appreciate you coming on. Thanks for the advice for us and for our listeners. And that's going to do it here. So for our special guest, Bill Pito, and for Joe Calabrese, I am Nick Durst, and this has been I'm Right.